In this tutorial, we're going to look at using the scene manager in the Phaser game library. So I have my documents ready and prepped to go. They're just waiting for me to populate them with some content. So I will create my HTML file first. And once I have the core of it done, then we will add in some scripts. And the scripts I will be using, I will be going into my scripts folder and grabbing Phaser. And then I'm also going to go in my script folder and grab main. So now my HTML file is done. And if I'm in my HTML file and I right click, I can choose open with live server. And at that point, it's going to open up my live server, and I can pull up the console because it's always good to have that up so we know as we start working if there are problems or issues. Now going back into the code, the HTML file is pretty much done. Down the road, we'll be adding some more to it when we look at Phaser's scale manager so that we can control how our game scales within different sized windows. But we're not going to worry about that right now. The next thing that we want to work on doing is focusing on putting our core shell of the Phaser logic in place. So I'll start out and create my global variable for my game. And because if we look at the HTML, we see we're loading the script in the head. One thing we want to do is make sure that things have loaded before we access them. So I'm going to use window add event listener. We'll grab the load event, and then I'm going to use an anonymous function. So there's no reason that I really have to create a named function. I could create a named function that would be my window loaded function and then call that right here with the event listener, or I can just simply create an anonymous function using the arrow style. So I put parentheses, an equal sign, and a right arrow or bracket. We could also just use the keyword function to parentheses and then have the curly braces. That would work as well. I'm also going to add a comment here, and this will be end load listener. As we start adding in more and more stuff into our script, it's always good to put comments on those closing braces so that we know what belongs with what. It makes it a lot easier for us to keep track of it. So once again, I will create a config object here. This is going to hold all of my config values. Then I pass that into the constructor when I create and populate my game with the Phaser game information. So our type of Phaser will be phaser.auto, comma, and now I can set in my width of 800, do a height of 600. Now I also see I kind of messed up on my width here. So sometimes my fingers are a little bit fast for the keys. I will set a background color, and for this 0x, and then 9999999. So 6 nines gives me a nice shade of gray. I could choose whatever color I want, but that's what I'm going to put in for it right now. So then we'll add in physics, because if we add additional objects in, I may want to at least turn on debug so I can see what is happening with it. So this is kind of our shell of a project. There's, of course, we're not adding in gravity or anything else, but we're putting that in. Now, that sets up our core part of it. Now, after the end of this, then I can say game still in the load listener, but outside of the config. Game is going to be equal to, and see, this is what we didn't want to have happen first, is we don't want to then have the script call game as a new phaser game before things have been loaded. And now we pass in the config object to it. So we can save this and jump back, and now we can see over on the right it says we have our little phaser rainbow and the phaser information, no error messages, so we can see that it is indeed working. So that's pretty awesome. Now we have it in place. We don't really have a lot of other content going. Previously, we then, in our script, we put all of the information of our game just directly in the script. What we're going to do this time is we're going to construct scenes. So think of scenes. We might have a title scene, a game scene, we could have a game over scene, we could have multiple levels. Scenes are first-class citizens inside of phasers, so we can even have multiple scenes running simultaneously. So if I, say, had an adventure game, I could have a mini-map that was a second scene that's working with the same set of variables, just displaying things differently from in the game. So there's a lot of ways that we can utilize scenes as our games grow more and more complex. To put the scenes into it, what we're going to do is create a scene. So I'll create my core scene, right? So I'll call it title scene, and then it is going to extend the default phaser scene. And I'll go down here and put in my comment that ends it. Now within a scene object, because it is extending it, and we are creating a class here, we need our constructor statement, which is then going to call super. So what that does is that allows it to then access all of the default properties of a scene. And here in the super statement, we will then define the key that we can use to reference this scene later on, because we will want to be able to reference this scene object in a different scene so we can switch from one scene to another scene. Now we had our different core functions we looked at in Phaser. So we had preload, create, and then update. So it's handy to put all of these in as stubs. Even if we're not going to populate them, we could always delete them later. But I like to get them in place now so that they're ready to go. So if we have multiple scenes, we can add these scenes to it. Now there's a couple of different ways we can add scenes to our project. So we can say game add scene and list the scene that we're adding with it. Then we can finally say game scene start and then pass in the key or the name of the scene. Something else we can do is we can add in scene as part of our config, and we can then include an array of scenes. So we use the square brackets here, and I'm going to reference the scene objects that I'm putting in. And in this case, I will say title scene. Now when I have more scenes, I'll do comma and I will put those in, but currently we only have one scene. So we can save this and put it over here, and no error messages, so that's good. Now if we want to see if anything's happening, we can even just log out a statement before we even put anything in there. Preload title. And now if I look in my console, I see we have preload title happening over on the side, so we know that that is then indeed being executed. So that puts us into a really good place. What I want to do here is I want to just put something on screen. So to put something on screen, I'm going to, in my preload, I am going to load an image. So this dot load image, not preload. We have to watch that VS Code auto-completed that preload. I typed load, and it changed it to preload. And that happened when I was working on a different project and I didn't catch it, and I couldn't figure out why I was getting error messages because preload load, that kind of looks the same. Your brain sees the word load, you're like, what the heck, it's not working. Why do I have this error message? Finally it's like, oh, I can't call preload inside of preload because that creates a weird recursion loop inside itself, and that's not gonna work. So then that creates a very unhappy experience. So I'm going to load the star image. Now if I look, I'm in the scripts folder. I need to go up one tier, so out of scripts, and then go into assets to access the star. So we use .. to go up a level, and then I can say assets, and then I can say star.png, so that allows me to load that star. Now under create here, this is where we can then tell our project that we want to show it. So I'm going to say let star button be equal to this. Now in this case, bad use of the word this and twice in a row, when we use the word this and we are inside this class, that becomes the reference object. So the word this is saying, I want this class title scene to load this image. I want title scene to, in this case, we will say add this image to our screen. We designate a location where, and then we will reference the key that we used when we added it. So the key is what the text we put with it inside the load statement. So then we're able to add it to the screen. And now we can see the star appeared in the middle of my screen, or approximate. It's slightly off because of the size of, or no, it is in the middle because images are on their start in the middle. So now that star is there and we see it happening. I want to turn the star into a button. If I want to turn it into a button, what we can do is we can say, because I named it button, that doesn't make it a button yet, but now if I say star button, we can say set interactive like this. And now that means it will respond to button events. So we can have pointer down, pointer over, pointer up, pointer out. So we have all these different events that we can respond to. So I will say star button dot on. We're using the on method. Then I will say pointer down, all lowercase, and then I'm going to call an anonymous function. So parenthesis, equal sign, right arrow, and then curly braces. And what I want to do is say star button dot set scale, and this time we're going to make it get really big. So now if we save this, let's see what happens. If I press down on it, we can see it got big, but I let go and it still is big. Well, if pointer down makes it go big, let's copy this, and this time instead of pointer down, let's go pointer up. And now I can set the scale back to 1. So when I press down, it gets big. When I let go, it should get small. So if we save this, let's take a look at it and see. So now it kind of acts like a button. I press it, it gets big, giving me visual feedback that something is happening. And indeed, it's working. So we're in our first scene. We've added an image. We've made that image interactive, so it's behaving like a button. So anything can become interactive in Phaser, which is pretty awesome. So I can make text, I can make buttons or images that behave as buttons. So we have to think about how we design our user interface and how we want our end user to interact with our project. And then we take that into account and provide the appropriate feedback so that that audience believes it's behaving in the way that makes sense, is logical, and engaging to them. With one scene working, it's time to add in a second scene. So I could copy paste everything, especially knowing that we're going to be reusing it in a very similar manner, but I'm going to instead retype it. This will be my game scene. Extends phaser.scene. And then curly brace, Type in constructor, curlies, super. Again, super calls the parent class. So in this case, it'd be phaser scene. And in the process, oh, we're not doing title scene. This is game scene. And in the process of calling it, what it does is it allows us to then gain all the properties and functionality of that original class. So that's really the beauty of doing that. So we'll have preload, create, and then finally update. So I have my 3 core methods that I'm working with. I do like to put in my comments here, because then when I am writing the code, I don't have to try and figure out what does this curly belong to. So it puts me into a better situation at that point. So one thing that we can do here is we're going to add in, in this case, we can put the star button in again. Now we don't have a reference to star button right now because star button was referenced inside the title scene. So what I can do is I can say let star. So now I will make a new reference to it. But I don't have to, notice I'm not putting it in preload, because once an image is loaded, it's going to be accessible to any scene in our game, and it doesn't matter what scene loaded it. Now I will put this image at a different point so that we see that it's in a different position. Now I've added this, I've put it here. If I save it and then we go and check it out, we'll see that nothing's changed. And one thing that we have to realize is, while I wrote the class for the game scene, I haven't added it to my game because we didn't put it there yet. So now I can add in game scene. So now we have access to it. So we can see that it's there. And then what I can do at this point is when I let go of the button, I can then put a command in and say this.scene switch, and now tell it where to go, and this will be game scene. One thing we'll notice is we're not really going to see a lot of difference, except the star image should move a little bit. So we might want to go in and change the background color to, oh, I changed the X instead of the Y. I meant to change the Y. I wanted it to move up. So we'll leave the X at 400 and move the Y to 200 because I wanted it to go up. That just seems nicer than going left. Now this one isn't interactive yet. It doesn't have the scale going on, but we can see that it is indeed moving to a new location. I'm going to go inside my scene here and say this dot. Because I don't have a background image yet, I'm just going to set the background color here, and I'm just choosing semi-random colors. So we'll choose a color here for the background, and then I'm going to do the same thing here and say this dot cameras main set background color. And this time I'm going to choose a little different color as part of it. And it will be CACAFF. Now you can choose whatever background colors you want. It's totally, whoop. Got a little unhappiness going on there. So let's, because if I look in the console there, it's telling me I forgot to capitalize the C in color when I chose background color. So let's save it again and see what, okay, so now we have this kind of candy pink, and now must have typed cameras wrong. Oh, I did this comma cameras. So again, the console is your friend. It tells you when you have messed up and it tries to help you. Oh, and while my shift key is not giving me what I want today, let's try again. And there, so now we have our cotton candy pink, our baby kind of blue lavender going in there, and we can see that it's working. But that does allow us to see a little bit easier that we're indeed changing and going from one scene to another. Now, if I want to make this button active as well, we can do star button.set interactive and then star button.on. And this time we're just going to do one of them, so I'll just do pointer down and then parentheses equal right arrow and then my curly brace and then this dot scene dot switch, and this time I will switch to title scene. Save it. No error messages, that's good. Click on the star, it moves. Click on the star again, we're back to the pink. So we can see that we're working back and forth. So switching scenes is good because it allows us to move from one scene to another scene. So we can have a title scene, we can have a game scene, we can have our win scene, our lose scene. But when we're using switch, what is happening is we are putting the current scene to sleep and then going to a new scene. So if we go back to that scene, everything will be exactly where it was before. So if we have something animating, it's going to keep animating from wherever it left off. It's not going to go back and reset itself to its original starting values. If we have variables like scores and lives and other things, they will not automatically reset. Instead, they will be where we left them off. So if we have game logic that says, hey, if the score is such or if lives are such, and then we go to the lose screen or win screen and then we go back, it's automatically going to just kind of keep kicking us back and forth and we'll be stuck in a loop because it's not resetting things. So that's what we're going to look at next. I'm going to add a few extra elements so that we can make this look a little bit more interesting. So that is then if the button there, I'm going to add some text on screen with this. So I will say let, I'll space it out a little bit, let click text equal to, this dot add dot text, and we'll put it almost centered and put it down a little bit at 400, and we will just put text on it that says click me, and then comma, and now I'm going to specify my font size, and we'll make it 32 pixels in size and give it a fill of black, so all zeros. So that now creates my click text. Click text set interactive will be true, and then click text on, and now I'll use the pointer down event as I did pointer on because I just said the word on. Again, anonymous function to go along with it. And what I want to do is update the click text information. So when I click on it, I want it to show me how many times I have clicked on it. So to accomplish that, so if we're going to keep track of how many clicks are happening, what we really need to do is we need to set a variable so we can track it. So inside my preload, I'll just say this.score equals 0. This now means this scene has a variable called score that we can work with and keep track of. So now every time I click on it, I can say this.score ++. that adds 1 to the score each time. That'd be the same as this dot score is plus equals this dot score, so plus 1. So we're able to add to it. The plus plus, of course, is the quicker way to write it. Now I will say click text dot set text, and then we will change it to click me space end quote plus this dot score. So that now adds it in. If I want, I can also log that out and just put this dot score so we see it being logged out on the console in case something happens with the text on screen. So now we get to see every time we click, it's going to add to it, and it should put it on screen. So let's save that and jump over and take a look at it. Now if I click me, we can see how indeed it's working. Now if I go to this next scene and go back, we can see it still is at 15. I'm going to add another star. This is why we put in physics, and then give it some velocity so it moves around on the screen. So I'll make a shooting star so we can again see it and understand how we can go from having our scenes, so we're starting our scenes, to being able to switch between them and get resets to happen and all kinds of cool stuff like that. So I've added 2 elements. Now we're going to add a third element in, and this time I'm going to call this shooting star. And actually we'll be tying it into the update. So we're in the create, this is where we want it. So let shooting star be equal to this dot physics dot add dot sprite, because we're animating it, and then we're going to need a second variable we're keeping track of, which will be our x position here. So I will add it in a moment. This will give us an error for a little while until we have defined what x position is. If I were to run this, we'll put this at 100, and then again use that star option. Going up into preload, this dot xpos is equal to, and we'll start this out at 0. So now we have our shooting star. We've added the sprite, and if we take a look at it, we'll see that star's over there. It also has a physics body attached to it, so we see that little pink option surrounding it. Now going back into it, what we can do is we can now say shooting this dot shooting star dot set velocity x, and we'll set it equal to 20. So it's moving, but it's going kind of slow. So now let's take a look and see what we have there. Oh, of undefined. And I realize we don't use let here because we're just creating this object to work with. So we'll say this dot shooting star. Same way we're assigning it as variables that we want to continue working with. If I did my let shooting star, I don't need this here because it would be within the context of these curly braces. So now that we have set this up, we can save it, jump over, and I can see how that star is now animating across the screen. I'll click a bunch of times. Now when I move to the new screen, there we are. We come back and we see the star left off and is animating exactly where we left off from. Now what I'm going to do is switch this to start game scene. If I go here and switch the switch to start, now when I run it, click it a bunch of times, star's animating, wait for a little bit so I'm verifying it's under the zeros, go here, go back, Now we can see everything reset. If I click, we're back to 1. So the key thing is if we want stuff to restart, we just tell the scene to call start, and that effectively erases the things in memory and it starts it over from the beginning. So it reruns preload, it does everything. If we want to be able to go back and forth, so we want a scene to effectively pause and go back to it, then we would need to use switch. So they have different reasons or different purposes depending on the result that you are trying to achieve.